It's time to start painting in the large group of trees on the right, and I'm going to use a large 1.5 inch sky texture brush, and I'm going to rough it out with that. Don't forget these are going to be autumn colours, but I want a dark background, so I'm just putting in some colour like that. Bit of burnt sienna, bit of Payne's grey, just for speed. In fact, I can push the brush down, look, and distort the shape of the brush, and I can stipple if I want. But for what I'm doing now, I'm just going to flick it down like that. There's going to be a lot of shadow at the bottom. And then I'll come and use my special brushes that I've designed for doing trees and foliage. A bit darker down the bottom here, more Payne's grey added. I want this to be darker, look here. Right, let's go to one of my special tree brushes. This is a Derwent water, the round end one. It's named after the river, of course, and the lake. So here we go, look, we'll just move that around. Now let's look at the shape of these trees. I'm using the paint that's already on there, and I'm just shaping them to get a more natural configuration. Do a bit at a time. I use a little bit of card, look, and there's lots of dark shadows at the bottom, so I'm now using a bit more Payne's grey to darken the colour. I'm leaving a few sky holes in for the dicky birds to fly through. I want a bit darker, Payne's grey, burnt sienna, let's have some depth in there. Right, what we'll do now, we'll use the Wonder Knife, and there's some large trees coming up here, look, large tree structures. So let's put those in like that. Another bit coming up there like that. I'll probably cover a lot of these over, but I like to start with a bit of structure. There's some bits coming through there like that. A few bits there. A few odd bits at the top. And there's some little ones coming through here like that. Right, we need to let that dry now. We're going to put the detailed foliage on now. We're not trying to paint every individual leaf, but we're going to actually put in an impression of the foliage. And I'm going to do that by using a little bit of acrylic paint. This is another form of water-based paint. But the advantage of this, by mixing acrylic watercolours with the traditional watercolour, the paint will stay on the top, and that's what I want, to get highlights in the foliage. So I'm using a little bit of yellow, cadmium yellow, pale. And here we go, we'll just stipple in a few. There we are. Look, I'm touching it very gently and just depositing bits of paint. Now the paint shouldn't be too dry to do this. With tissue in your hand, if your paint's wet, you can always just do that, take the colour off and dry it. So let's have a look and get some structure in here. We'll have a lighter tree there, look. See how easy it is? All I'm doing is stippling. There's a light tree there, look. My hand's resting on the paper, look. I want to be nice and relaxed when I'm doing this. Now let's add a bit of that orange. This is cadmium orange with a little bit of alizarin crimson, a little bit of white. That'll give us a nice soft peachy colour. There we are, look. Let's build that out like that. More yellow. You notice I'm not rinsing the brush, I'm just mixing other colour with the colours that's already on there. Bit of raw sienna now, a yellowy orange if you like. Then we'll put the highlights in. Bit more yellow, cadmium yellow. Now let's have some lighter bushes down the bottom here. And then we'll add depth in the trees, but that's the last stage. We'll have a light bush down here. Right, we'll leave this here I think. And then we'll come back to it when we bring all the painting together. Right, now we've got more trees further along here. We'll start painting these in now. Before I do that, I needed to take the mountain a bit further down. Bit of raw sienna it was, like that. Yes, I forgot to take the mountain right down to ground level here. Yeah, that'll do fine. Just put a little bit of blue in parts. And we'll take out the brush strokes at the top. There's some big feature trees here, we'll put that in. There's a trunk coming up here, and it's going to be dark, so I want some burnt sienna and Payne's grey. Now some of you may be using burnt umber, but I found I don't need that because I mixed some Payne's grey with some burnt sienna. I've basically got burnt umber. Right, here we go then. we'll put in the trees here. There's actually a dark tree here and a lighter one behind. Right, I'll lighten the colour now and put the ones behind in. I'll add a bit of blue to that green, I think. I'll use a bit of card as a mask so I can work down to the line. Little bush in the bottom. Right, let's do this, the main feature tree here. So here we are, we've put the undercoat on for these trees and then we'll put the foliage on in a moment. Now we need to let this dry before we progress further. Let's put the highlights on these trees now. A little bit of white acrylic, a little bit of cadmium yellow light. Here we go, just a bit there, just touch gently, look. I'll do the back trees first. And I'll just add a little bit of blue in there as well, I think. Just a big tree behind this one at the front, coming out of the riverbank at the front. Right, let's go on. Bit of burnt sienna, bit of alizarin crimson, bit of orange, cadmium orange, and a bit of white. And let's do this tree here, that's it. Let's pick out this one in front. More white, more orange. I'm going to add a little bit of yellow now to the mix and more white. A few highlights now. We'll put the highlights in at the end. When the whole picture's put together, we'll see what we need to do. But I want a few lighter bits in here. And these two bushes behind here we'll put in. A bit of raw sienna, a bit of cadmium orange, a bit of white. Another one underneath there. Add more yellow to that and a bit of green. Because I don't want this colour to clash with the main tree that's above and in front of it. Right, there's a tree in here now. We're going to put something in there. So I'll darken the colour again with a bit of Payne's grey. I need a bit more water on my brush. That's the secret, knowing how wet the paint is. But coming across here, there's some little bushes like that. Darker colour. We'll use a bit of card again, just to stop it coming down too far over the bank. And then I need a bit of tissue in my hand. Rinse the brush. A little bit of white. A bit of orange. Bit of yellow, cadmium yellow, and let's put a few little bits of highlights on there. Right, now let's do this riverbank. It's all in shadow, so I'm going to use a 3/4 flat, and I need the card. So under here it's quite dark, so I want some Payne's grey and some burnt sienna. And we'll go along here and just put in some of the bank there. I'm leaving bits of area uncovered. See what I do with that later. Just dancing across, look like that, simple. Wipe the brush down. There's a lot of shadow in this area here, right along the bank. Right, I'm going to switch now to a smaller brush, my size 8 rigger, and I'm using a bit of raw sienna and a little bit of white, not a lot. But I'm going to just come along the bottom there and twitch bits up like that, just to soften that bank like that. Where I've left the paper uncovered, I can put a bit of raw sienna along there, and we'll just twitch that up to fuse the colours together. And then a bit more Payne's grey, but I want it darker at the bottom. And we'll just go along here and put some darker colour in, shape the bank a bit. But it's not all level. Little bits coming out into the water, and then we'll just have a good wiggle and add some dark in here. Look, just put some dark colour and have a good wiggle. Get some depth in there, look. Payne's grey and a bit of burnt sienna. Just put some dark in there. Trees are dark on the inside, and of course there's shadow underneath them because of the weight of the foliage. So we'll just wiggle that around like that, look. Can't beat a good wiggle. And behind here, there's a little bit of grass, a bit of green. I've already got colour mixed on the palette, you see. I'm just going in there like that. Touch of raw sienna because it's autumn and the grass won't be beautifully green. And behind here there's just a bit of background here. There's a fence I've got to put in eventually. We need to dry this now before we progress further.